Mr. Ebrd, thank you for being with us and taking our questions. My first question will be, what do you and the Ebrd see as main achievements and main challenges for Georgia's economy since 2012 and in coming years?
As you probably know, Ebrd has been active here already for many years. And to date, we view ourselves as one of the most important investors in the country, with cumulative investments of 3.4 billion in 235 projects. And the reason why I'm saying this as an introduction is it means we are actually active in all sectors in the economy, from the financial sector, your banks, to the energy sector, manufacturing, and also working with your sovereigns. The fact that I can say that actually Georgia, in terms of investments per capita, is the most important, the highest of all Ebrd countries, actually tells you we have been very successful here. So therefore, I think the challenge is to actually keep the current level of investment very high as possible, and also that is also only possible with a stable investment climate.
How do you evaluate this investment climate today?
That's a very good question, and it's probably very complex. It's very difficult for me. I'm visiting Georgia for the first time since I became first vice president of the Ebrd, and I think it's not very wise to comment on a situation when you only have been in the country for 24 hours. Nevertheless, having said that, we do hear from many businesses and other sources that there is a certain unrest in the economy, and that there is a threat of that the business climate is not further improving.
I don't know whether you are familiar with current situation in Georgia's economy, but as vice chair of Ebrd, you would be noticing that current business investment climate in Georgia is being heavily regulated, and part of these regulations are coming from harmonization policy, whatever. But mostly these regulations are done at a very quick pace, mostly without RIA, regulatory impact assessment, and this is the main challenge that business itself is talking about. What is your take on that?
Actually, today, this afternoon, we had a meeting with your new Prime Minister. This was, of course, also one of the topics we discussed. And as you might know, we are one of the initiators of the Investors' Council here. And the Prime Minister actually brought this up, that he thought that this is a very valuable instrument. And he also assured us that actually he will more and more listen to the business community during the upcoming weeks. We will have several meetings. So we got all the assurances we want this afternoon that this will be addressed by the new leadership. Since
you mentioned in Investors' Council, could you name the main achievement of this council? Since you said that the Ebrd is very successful in Georgia, what would you name as one reform that has been, I don't know, implemented in Georgia?
As a result of the Investors' Council? The Investors' Council in general is an extremely important communication channel where important investors in the country have a direct link to your leadership, to your Prime Minister. So usually that's already sufficient to actually make sure that some of the smaller issues are being tackled. But you asked for concrete examples, and there I would, for example, say EU harmonization, but also the Investors' Council played a very important role in the recent land reforms.
What would you name as Ebrd as the most crucial structural, whatever types of reforms that Georgia needs to implement in order to secure its investment climate, as you said, is very important for future success?
Now, we as Ebrd, we believe that the government should continue its successful road on continuous reforms. I think it's very important that the stabilization of the investment climate continues. Actually, we feel that Georgia is one of the prime examples where more than 15 years ago, through a radical change in many areas, actually you became of the prime examples for other countries in the region. I'm just referring to things like corruption, where on the corruption perception index, within a few years you made a tremendous improvement, but that is also true, for example, the ease of doing business and other areas. And as you already mentioned in your introduction, there is currently some noise and some fear by certain foreign investors that the speed of the current reforms is not anymore what it was in the past. So I think that would be my primary advice to Georgia and its leadership.
You mentioned continuous reforms, and I think continuous is a key word here, and let me explain why I'm telling you this. For like current 2 or 3 years, we see permanent changes of government and very quick changes. And I don't know what Ebrd would say. Probably you wouldn't want to comment on that. But our impression here in
Correct, yeah.
our impression here in Georgia is that we don't understand why prime ministers resign in this country, because each of them in their final speech say that they were very successful and that they have achieved their goals. But my question to you is that does this affect this business climate and this sense of continuity that we were speaking?
Ebrd is not a political organization, and in fact we want to work together with every government. Because we don't do this for governments, we do this actually for the people in Georgia. And of course it is true that any change in government brings certain challenges and certain uncertainties. So we also know that in 1 year, again, there are elections. So it's very likely that there will be another change, at least of a part of the minister. Having said that, the changes over the last few years haven't really truly harmed Georgia. If you look at on a macroeconomic level, if you look at the GDP growth rates, if you look at inflation rates, if you look at the fiscal deficit, the fiscal policies, actually we see quite a stable picture.
What about Larry? Larry, because business is very vocal now about depreciation in the currency, and they are very vocally saying that this is hurting their businesses.
Yeah, a stable currency is important for all countries, and that is not different for Georgia. Actually, what we see in Georgia is also a very relatively high dollarization, so it is very important that actually that will be reduced, and that together with the Ebrd, that we see more local currency financing, that we see a more development of a local capital markets, and we're very much working on that. Every currency will have fluctuations. That is here in Georgia, true, but that is also for the euro. That is, I live now since 1.5 years in London, in the United Kingdom, with a volatile pound there. So I think that's just part in life. And to be honest, when I look at the last few years, despite the uncertainties, despite actually what has happened to some of your major trading partners, for example, Turkey or Russia, actually the economy and the lari held up remarkably well.
Since you said that Ebrd is working in many fields and many sectors in Georgia, where does Ebrd see the opportunity for growth? Which sectors?
I don't want to limit myself and pointing to certain sectors where we actually focus on. I think Georgia is a very diversified country, and that means that we should continue active in many areas. Having said that, we historically have seen that, particularly during the last few years, we have seen our involvement increasing on the energy side, on the renewable energy side. So I could very well see that this will be continued. Also, you will see us more working with municipalities. We, for example, work here in Tbilisi on the financing of making the city even greener. And it is already a beautiful city, but why not have then buses which are running on gas or on electricity, so to make the city even cleaner.
And also you are involved in supporting SME sector as well. What are the results there?
We are indeed a big, strong supporter of the SME sector. I think the SME sector, like in any country, is the backbone of the economy. And that is also true in Georgia. However, for us, as a very large bank, with only one office here, a very strong office, but we only have 35 people here in Georgia. That means that it's very difficult to actually directly access every single SME. So we usually do this through partners, and these partners can be banks, where we provide financing to these banks, and they on-lend it then again to these SMEs. In addition, we also have what we call an advisory program, and there, to date, we have basically gave services to 1,300 SMEs over the past years. This can be advice in terms of IT, it can be in terms of websites, it can be in terms of risk management, it can be everything.
What is your take on FDI inflows in Georgia? Because what we see in figures, it tells us that new flows of FDI practically are not coming to the country. What could be the reason for that, in your opinion? And do you see there something that tells us anything about business climate in Georgia or investment climate in Georgia?
Another good question, and I think it's never smart to disagree with the person who interviews you. But let me disagree with you there. I recently read a report from one of the major rating agencies where actually Georgia was upgraded in terms of credit rating. And one of the many things they actually cited was a relatively stable FDI inflow of around 7 to 8% of GDP. And that has been stable over the last 2 years.
Probably you are talking about Fitch ratings, and Fitch ratings said that for the coming years, Anaklia project would have been one of the major projects for FDI inflows in the country, but we see these current problems, so to say, with this project. Then let me ask you to comment on that.
I think it's fair to say that Anaklia is a very important project, can be a very important project. And not only for Georgia, by the way, but for the region. I yesterday was in Armenia, and actually also the Armenian government and business people, they talk about how important the Anaklia deep sea project is. Having said that, we're currently in a situation where we still are looking for the best structure. In that respect, also that was discussed with your Prime Minister, and he's currently analyzing the situation. And we stated that we are committed to actually step in if we find a bankable solution.
What would stepping in mean? Because this is very important. What would be the actions that...
I cannot tell you that, because that obviously depends on the direction of the decision of the government, of the sponsorship of the sponsors itself, on the equity which goes in, and possibly, I mean, ideally, Ebrd is not even needed, because as you know, Ebrd is a development bank, and Ebrd is only doing things when there is a gap with the commercial market. So we call this, there is a need for additionality. So we mentioned to the Prime Minister, if there is a gap on the financing side and it's a good project, we are willing to actually play our role and finance part of it.
Thank you for what you are doing for Georgia.
Thank you for this very nice interview.